the general public is learning more about the importance of a bedtime
Yeah.
routine. I think it's just everywhere now, these visuals of having these little bedtime routines for kids. And so I think on the other side of that, I see a lot of rigidity around a bedtime routine.
Right. And if it's also rigid to the point where sometimes it takes forever, and if they're
Mhm.
out late or they have a different evening for some reason and the parent can't do
Mhm.
all these
Mhm.
things, like then it just
Mhm.
unwinds or
Right.
unravels from there. How are you sleeping? Are you sleeping? I'm Dr. Shelby Harris, licensed clinical psychologist and director of sleep health at Sleepopolis, where we dive deep into all things sleep. If you like Sleep Talking with Dr. Shelby, take a second right now to like this video on YouTube or give us a 5-star rating through Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I know it seems simple, but it helps us reach a lot more people to get them the rest they deserve. And if you're tired of hitting that snooze button, hit the subscribe button instead. A new episode of science-backed sleep tips is available every other Wednesday. What do we do when our kids just can't sleep through the night? Should we turn to a sleep specialist first, or maybe a psychologist, someone who does both? Today, in recognition of Children's Awareness Month this June, we're kicking off a special 3-part episode to reflect on how we can prioritize our children's health and well-being all month long. To help, we've invited Doctors Andrea Roth and Allison Shale to talk about common sleep behaviors and solutions for children from newborns to grade schoolers. Because if your child has trouble falling asleep, it may be more than just sleep issues. Next time, in part 2, we'll dive even deeper into these issues with practical advice for all the parents and guardians out there. In part 3, we'll be answering your questions, listeners. Anything and everything you want to know about kids and sleep. So, if your kids' sleep could be better, or you know someone whose kids' sleep could be better, just comment your questions below. If you're watching this on YouTube, and we'll answer them. You can also send your questions via Facebook or Instagram at Sleepopolis and at SleepDocShelby. Now, let's get to our guests. With over 10 years' experience treating children in schools, hospitals, and private practice, psychologist Dr. Andrea Roth is known for her expertise in sleep and anxiety for children. Versed in a wide range of childhood concerns, Dr. Andrea loves providing insight and support to parents to ensure that when kids master new skills, their caregivers also gain the knowledge and confidence to be as supportive as possible. Bringing another 10 years of experience to us today is Dr. Allison Shale, a psychologist and director of Shale Psychology. Specializing in anxiety, ADHD, depression, sleep disturbances, and behavior problems, Dr. Allison aims for children to feel understood and heard while providing parents with tangible strategies and insight that can benefit the entire family and last a lifetime. And I'm also so honored to be co-authoring an upcoming book for parents on kids' sleep with them as well. So keep an eye out for that. Dr. Andrea, Dr. Allison, we are so glad you're here. Welcome to Sleep Talking with Dr. Shelby.
Thank you. We're so
Oh,
excited.
thanks. We're
I'm excited to be here. I mean, we text all the time, but I never actually get to have
I
a
know.
conversation with you.
Right. This is the text coming to
It's
life.
lovely. I'm really excited to have
This
you.
is the closest we've come to ever sitting in the same room.
It's crazy. So, Andrea, Allison, when we think about all the sleep problems plaguing kids today, and there's a lot of things out there, that's for sure, especially since the pandemic, what do we find, or what do you see in your practice are the usual suspects? Like, what sleep issues really come to mind for you first?
I think we get different stuff. Allison, what do you
Mhm.
get first?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see a lot more of the behavior
Mhm.
issues, the kids who don't stay in bed. I see a lot of younger kids, toddlers who aren't maybe transitioned to a bed maybe a little too early and can't stay in bed. kids who are getting into bed with their parents and parents want them out, which is a different, thing than for parents who like having their child in their bed. So I think I see more of the behavioral
Yeah.
side of things. And then certainly there's always a little bit of that anxiety in there too, especially with kids who are getting out at night. But I think with my kiddos, it's a lot of that preschool age, still kind of learning the rules of bedtime and sleeping that parents really need a lot of help with.
What about you, Andrea?
Right. I think I get right some similar stuff, but then I think because of our training, because of the clinics that we're in, I think I get a lot more of the anxiety side. I think we get a lot of kids here who have um, subclinical or clinical levels of anxiety and the kind of associated sleep concerns with them, even when families come to us primarily for sleep concerns. I feel like it's very unsurprising when we kind of uncover the fact that there are a lot of kind of co-occurring anxiety disorders with them. I think specifically here, we tend to have a lot of kids that have, separation anxiety or generalized anxiety or selective mutism. So I think I definitely get more of that presentation, that sleep anxiety or the kind of the co-occurrence of the two.
Interesting. You guys have both talked about anxiety a good amount, stress, anxiety. Do you
Hmm.
think, given that you've been in practice for a while now, have you seen it get worse since the pandemic in children? Because you really you see the children so much more than I do in practice.
Hmm.
Like, is that gotten worse?
I think so. I mean, I don't necessarily know
Yeah.
if like the anxiety in and of itself
Yeah.
has gotten worse. And I don't know if we can point to one specific aspect of the pandemic. I think when we went into the pandemic, I had this huge like prediction that I treat a lot of kids with OCD, that we're going to have this huge like surge of contamination
Yeah.
based OCD. And I don't think I saw it as much as I did, but I definitely think that our wait lists, our referrals, the volume of patients that we have has
Hmm.
just exploded. And so I do think the symptoms of anxiety have increased. But again, it's hard for me to say because I think that the population that I get is a little bit skewed. Allison, are you getting more? Do you get more anxiety?
Yeah, I think I am getting more anxiety than I used to, but really one thing that I always wonder about is it really that there's more anxiety, or is it that parents were with their kids a lot more and they noticed more things
Hmm.
that were more concerning, or they saw their kid maybe doing virtual learning and realized, oh my God, my kid freezes, my kid never raises their hand, that kind of thing. And then I think now with more parents still maybe doing a hybrid model or things like that, I get the sense that parents are just picking up on things more. So I don't really know if it's that it's worse or it's
Recognition.
just that people are, yeah, maybe it's just a recognition sort of thing. And I think pediatricians and things like that maybe are on a little bit more high alert. And so from a referral standpoint and things like that, I think I am getting more calls about kids with anxiety.
I would say in schools too. I mean, states poured, at least in Michigan, states poured money into schools for mental health efforts and recognition and training. And so I think they're seeing it a lot more and sending. I've never had so many direct referrals from schools before.
Yeah. But do you think there's more stress though on these children? Like, I think about, like, in my school, I have a third grader, and they start doing the state tests, and it's a lovely school, wonderful school.
Yeah.
But the talk about the tests, like, I don't remember this with my
Yeah.
14-year-old. It's like, we're going to do great. They had to write affirmations for themselves. And I understand it's coming from a good place, but I think it's actually creating more anxiety in some of these kids, test anxiety, because they're talking about it for weeks in advance over a test
Yeah.
that really doesn't mean that
Yeah.
much in their own progress of their education.
Day to day.
So I'm
Right.
curious if you see
Yeah.
more of that kind of stress getting put on kids too.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
we got this.
Yeah.
I, again, like, love my
Yeah.
kid's school. We got this contradictory email as caregivers of like literally one paragraph was like, it's fine, don't stress, everything's good, no big deal with this. And then the next paragraph is like, but what you should do to prepare your child for this test is
Ugh.
make sure they get a good amount of sleep, make sure they get a good meal, make sure that they're not distracted, talk
Yeah.
to them about
Yeah.
trying their best. And so if that's the message that we're getting as adults, I worry about the message that they're getting. My daughter's in first grade, the message that they're getting
Yeah.
about testing. She's nervous.
Yeah.
I don't think I even knew what that was when I was
Yeah.
that age,
Yeah.
seeing testing.
Yeah.
So how do you think that the anxiety and the stress specifically, how do you see it playing into bedtime, sleep issues, and
Mm.
what might you do
Yeah.
for the kids who tend to really have a lot of anxiety at night or stress that's coming out?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really interesting always is that bedtime is this nice time for a lot of parents to really get quiet time, alone time with their
Mhm.
kids. I have a family I'm working with now, and we're talking about sleep, and the dad spends like 25 minutes in the bed with the kid, and they don't want to remove that because that's really their only time
Mhm.
during the day that they get to really talk. So I think from an anxiety standpoint, a lot of times kids hold it together all day, and then the parents get the dump when their guards are down, kind of right at night. So some of it is being a little more proactive, right? Maybe earlier in the day, checking in on what went on during the day and things like that to maybe decrease the likelihood of that kind of explosion or dump right at bedtime. But I know that I've talked to you guys about this idea. I think really knowing your child and who your child is during the day in terms of their anxiety level is so important in terms of what we then decide to do at bedtime. And, some people it's more of like a cold turkey. We rip the band-aid off and we change something. For other people, it really needs to be a lot more gradual and kind of maybe gradually getting a parent out of the room, or gradually, not expecting a child to go from waking up 5 times a night to no
Yeah.
times a night, right? Maybe it's just slowly doing it so the kid doesn't have as much anxiety, but also so the parent
Mhm.
doesn't. Because even when a parent wants change, there's a lot of anxiety around what am I going to do when my kid freaks out when I change this? So we got a lot of times, I think in our work, we really have to balance the anxiety of the kid and the anxiety that likely appears when we start talking to parents about what they have to do differently.
Yeah, I agree with Allison a lot, and I think to your original question as well about, like, how do we think that stress and anxiety is impacting them at bedtime? A conversation that I like to have with families is this idea that the behavior that they're seeing in their child at bedtime is really just an extension of what's going on during the day. It's not that your child completely shifts and changes at bed. This is very likely an extension of what's going on during the day and their behavior, whether it's kind of that more defiant kind of, phenotype, or if it's more this anxious, stressed phenotype of this is what we're seeing all day long. It's just being enhanced at bedtime. So, and I think for a multitude of reasons of the fact that right, it's the that brain dump at the end of the night. It's the first time they have with their parent. They're tired, and so they're a
Yeah.
little more maybe emotionally labile. I think there's so many reasons as to why we see this real impact of daytime stress on bedtime functioning.
So when you were saying, Allison, you were saying earlier to be aware of their anxiety during the daytime. How would a parent know that this is necessarily problematic or this is just my kid's temperament? Like, how would they be able to kind of tune into that?
Yeah, I think it's funny because even just that question, right? So sometimes it can be a problem, even if it really just is your kid's temperament, right?
Mhm.
Those things but can both kind of be true. And I think for a lot of kids that have anxiety, it is a little bit of a part of who they are. And so our goal won't be to eliminate the anxiety, right? Like that's is who they are, but maybe we want to help them manage it. I often just talk to parents very broadly about, do you see them missing out
Mhm.
on things that you think they want to do,
Mhm.
right? Are they holding back? Are they saying they can't go on that play date? They can't go to that birthday party. They need you there. They won't carpool. What are the things that you would like for them to do that you actually think they might like
Okay.
to do that they're saying no to? So I often pay attention to that impairment piece,
Mhm.
which from a clinical standpoint is so important when we're making an actual diagnosis of anxiety. So I don't necessarily use that word with parents, but I'll say, like, are there things in the day that you really think, Samantha would love to do that's something stopping her from doing? And maybe it is that.
Okay.
Mhm.
So what about anxiety, stress? I think everyone's dealing with it. It's just on various levels of how much it's impacting them. What about
Mhm.
at night if a child's waking up and they're really anxious? Like, what other things, other than having the parent there, are there other things, techniques, things that you teach them to do to help manage their anxiety a bit more at night?
I think what's interesting is that, Allison and I both, when we work with families on sleep, I think we tend to work a lot more from a parent model and kind of parent led treatment. And so I think when a child is older, we will work with them
Yeah.
to, you know, use some anxiety strategies around, broadly like some cognitive restructuring or some physiological relaxation, guided imagery, et cetera. But I think what I have found, at least, to be very helpful is on the parent side of how do we respond when they're anxious at bedtime in the middle of the night. And I mean, this feels so redundant. I think that we talk about using strategies more during the day that
Okay.
then kind of carry on into the night. I think that when we get into this back and forth of trying to engage in a lot of strategy at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
it kind of can prolong what's happening. It can make it bigger. It then turns into this whole kind of engaging conversation where no one's going back to sleep for several hours. And so I think that we start foundationally with a lot of anxiety work that really starts in like broad daylight that can be helpful. And one of the strategies that Allison mentioned was this kind of this addition of worry time or acknowledge and defer or whatever manual you're pulling it from. It's this idea of kind of having this consolidated time where child and one caregiver one-on-one sit and talk
Yeah.
about like what's on their mind, what's stressing them, what's bothering them.
Okay.
And it's really consolidated before we kind of get into the bedtime routine and before we kind of move into that shift into night.
So it's really about focusing on the day, because I get asked all the time, like, what can I teach my child to do in the middle of the night? Can we teach them just deep breathing? It's really about implementing it during the day to help then at night more so. Okay. What about routine, consistent routine? Like how often are you seeing just like all over the place kind of stuff go on?
I mean, I laugh because so many people come in and say, like, we have the best bedtime routine. And then, well, Andrew and I both have them fill out like a sleep log. And you'll see that like bedtime has a 90-minute range from day to day, you know, with like a 4 or 5-year-old. Or some days, you know, they let them watch TV. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's phones in the bed. Sometimes there's 10 books. Sometimes, and, you know, I think sometimes parents think that they're being consistent with their routine and they're not. And we typically talk about having like a 3 or 4 step kind of really firm routine with everything leading to being in the bed, right? So maybe it's brush teeth, PJs, read some books, in the bed. Like short and sweet. We're not, you know, incorporating the snack as part of the bedtime routine. We're not having all these other things that may be part of your night, but we're not calling that bedtime routine because those aren't really like goal driven to get you in the bed and get you sleeping.
I think on the other side of that, like I think that the general public is learning more about the importance of a bedtime routine. And I think it's just everywhere now, you know, these visuals of having these little bedtime routines for kids. And so I think on the other side of that, I see a lot of rigidity around a bedtime routine. And so it is kind of like it looks nice, but it's fanatic. It's like, well, we have this perfect bedtime routine and we do this and we read the exact same book and we sing the exact same song and we do that. And then there's this kind of real rigidity in it that I see and this real focus on it. And also like, why is this one piece of sleep hygiene, this one piece of good habits, not fixing everything?
Right. And if it's also rigid to the point where sometimes it takes forever, and if they're out late or they have a different evening for some reason and the parent can't do all these things, like then it just unwinds or unravels from there. But what about like, how would you recommend the, like, just one more book? I'm thirsty. I mean, I remember my daughter was constantly like, but I'm still hungry. Like, what about all the demands that the 3, 4, 5-year-olds come up with, even though you might have a good routine? Like, how should a parent respond to that?
My son is doing that right now. I swear, every time we have to go. So it's not even bedtime. It's like every time we have to go somewhere, he's, I'm starving, and I swear he might be, but he's so hungry. We feed him. But I think that, as Allison said, we don't build it into the actual bedtime routine because the bedtime routine is this like targeted, you know, heading in one direction thing of we're getting ready to settle in. But with parents, I often, just like that worry time where we're going to allot this time before the bedtime routine to talk about worries. If a kid is consistently coming up with, I need this, I need this, I need this, I build that in. I have built in what I call last chance time with kids often, like right before the bedtime routine starts. We've got 10 minutes. So if you really want to have, you know, 10 books, if you want to have, you know, more snacks, more water, go to the bathroom. For me, it's a lot of just like getting ahead of all of it and then having the parent be firm and consistent in that we've already done that. The kitchen is closed, or we've already done that. We get 3 books and now we're done. That to me is more important. It's not even just what do we do with the kid who wants 8 more snacks. It's how can the parent be consistent in their response of, nope, time for bed, in a loving, empathic way.
Right. Yeah, you said it better than I could have. That was 100% what I was thinking about, is that like last snack idea, giving them, you know, a bedtime water cup, get a little bit ahead of it. And then also trust your gut, right? If your kid is calling you back in asking for a snack and you know that they ate dinner and they had a snack 15 minutes ago, you don't have to go in and give them a snack, right? You are allowed to know that your child just went to the bathroom and that, are they just stalling you or do they really need to? So again, not a perfect science, but being consistent with, when I say 3 books, it's going to be 3 books, because then if you give 4 today, of course they're going to ask for a 4th tomorrow. And it's worth it to ask for a 4th because you might say yes. So we hope then that the child kind of learns just very behaviorally, what you do shapes your child's response next
Yeah.
time or what they're going to do next time. And so we come at it really from with that mindset of be consistent so your kid learns what'll happen when they do XYZ.
Absolutely.
The thing that I hear a lot is when I have parents of younger children in my practice, they will often say, well, I'm the hard one. I'm the one who follows the rule, the consistent stuff and says no, and the other one's very lenient. How does that inconsistency between the parents play out? What do you recommend there? Because that's really parent training more so.
Didn't we just add a chapter about that in the book? Wasn't
Potentially.
that a last minute
That's
ad?
a big one.
Wasn't
That's
that?
a big one.
It's so hard. It's so complicated. And I would bet that within all of our marriages, there are differences between us and our partner and how we do anything, let alone parenting. I think so. There's a lot of it, I think, that starts with that kind of empathic understanding of like, yep, I get it. That's life. No one's going to parent in the exact same way. We came from different parents. We came from whatever. But then I think communication is like the biggest thing that we can do, and sitting down and having these hard conversations of this is what I do, this is what you do. And can we either meet in the middle, or can we have the third party, this psychologist that we are paying to tell us how to do this? Can we listen to her and kind of all get on her page? And then I think, as much as I hate like a hack or anything like that, I think the secret weapon in this is writing it out. I think writing the plan out is like secretly the strongest thing you can do. In my personal practice, when I make recommendations for changes in sleep, I don't do this for like general patients, but I write out what I have said to them, or I type out what I've said to them, and they get it. They walk away with a written plan so that I know that they're going to be on the same page. But then I think that there's this like extra layer if there's separation or divorce. And that's kind of, I think, when we leave that to the co-parenting professionals.
That makes a lot of sense. I love the writing it out. I would never think to like have it just there as the plan, as opposed to like trying to remember. All right. So,
you can't argue that.
Yeah. And I often say to people, like, I'm the fall guy, like, blame me. I'm the one who's giving you those recommendations. So that's fine.
Oh, all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. I'm like, if it doesn't work, come back, try it, blame me if it doesn't, and then we'll figure something else out.
I love it. Screens. This is like such a big issue. And I think about in my school district, they give screens now. They give an iPad to kids starting in kindergarten for school. And I think about my 8th grader, and all of his work is on an iPad, and he has so much homework. He has one book from like 1995. That's a French book. Everything else is on a iPad. So like, it's only going to get worse as he gets older with more and more homework. So how do you deal with screen time when a kid is, or even like a toddler, they're just on the iPad at night and you're going to try and get it away from them?
Again, I mean, I think there's kind of two parts to it. The first is a lot of times we'll talk to parents about what the child's watching, because there are certainly things that are like better to watch before bed, maybe things that are calmer, not aggressive fighting, not having the volume up to 1,000, right? Watching something on a TV versus watching on an iPad in terms of the blue light and all of that stuff, not having things kind of right in their face, not that endless loop that the iPad can also have. But building off of what Andrea just said, I think that in most situations, the consistency and the rule and the boundary is so much more important than saying if an hour is better than 90 minutes. Because I think if parents say this is when screens go away, that's when screens need to go away. That needs to be kind of the expectation of whatever it is that you're doing. And a lot of times in that initial conversation with people, we'll talk about how much screen time they're having. We'll talk about if they feel good about it. And most of the times, no matter where they say they're at, most of the times people say, I wish we were doing less. And so a lot of times that can be a really good first point. So if they say we give them 2 hours a day, maybe we'll say, well, why don't you cut it back to 90 minutes, right? So a lot of times I go off of, in terms of time, I go off of what they're doing to, again, make it realistic. We're not going to, some kids, if you're on it for 4 or 5 hours, we're not going to say, let's cut it back to 30 minutes. That's probably not possible. And we want the kids to be successful and the parents to be successful. So.
I mean, I completely and totally agree. I think that screen time right now, like you said, it's like this hot, huge topic. The number of families that I get that come in and say they're like humiliated. They're the shame that like, we let Bobby have like 20 minutes of Bluey before bed, and I'm so sorry, and I know we shouldn't. And I'm like, it's fine. Everyone's fine. We're
Yeah.
alive. I also
Yeah.
love a good bluey. Like, it's okay. The shame that they feel about it is just wild. And because it's blown up. It's
Yeah.
like, if you show your kid a screen within 6 hours of bedtime, they're never going to
Yeah.
sleep. You're a
Right.
terrible parent. And so I think it is. It's all about this middle ground. And I think that what the field is coming to recognize, and even within, the research is coming to show us, is that there has to be this kind of happy medium. Screens are unavoidable until we
Yeah.
can. We're not going to get screens out of our kids' schools entirely.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to get it out of the home. We're not going to get them out of schools. They have to be part of our existence. And so how do we learn to live with them in a way that still works with sleep? So, right. It's like, it's not just the type of screen, it's the content of the
Yes.
screen. Is it right? Is it something that's like sucking you in, or is it something that you can kind of like naturally turn off? And then can we be right a little bit thoughtful about, is it the last thing we do before bed? I think that it's just like everything, that's it's flexibility and fidelity. Like, it's got to
Mhm.
be following the ideal, but we have to also kind of make that work with our real life.
Yeah. And I think, I grew up, my mom won't want me to admit this, but I grew up with a TV in my bedroom, right? It was
Same.
in the eight.
Same.
Oh,
And my dad's a sleep doctor.
um, I grew up with a TV in my bedroom. I mean, we didn't know any better. And for many, many years, I needed to have a TV to be able to fall asleep at night. I was a fine
Yeah.
sleeper, but it really kind of it made it very obvious for me that I had that connection made. And I've tried really hard to try and break
Yeah.
that habit. But I think that's what you need to think about. Like, do you need an hour of TV every night to be able to fall asleep? Do you have other ways to kind of
Right.
soothe yourself and relax, or is that the only thing? And the blue light is not as terrible. It's as people make it out to.
Right.
It's not like going to
Right.
ruin everything. And we find in kids and adults,
No.
it's not horrible. It's more of like, are they staying up? Are they getting more agitated from? Are they
Yeah.
getting more activated? Whatever it might be, that they're delaying sleep. That's the bigger issue. What about nightmares and night
Yeah.
terrors?
Well, the magic three questions. I think that that's
Yeah.
always like, I think families just more come in and say, like, how do I know?
Yeah.
So the magic three
Yeah.
questions, which we all ask every single day, which hopefully your listeners know at this point, is, what time is it happening? First third of the night, it's likely more a sleep terror. Latter, it's a nightmare. Who remembers it? If just the parents remember it,
Mhm.
it's likely a sleep terror. If the kid remembers it, it's a nightmare. And how hard is the child to wake? If they're like, if you walk into the room and they're immediately snapping up,
Yeah.
it's a nightmare. If you have to like physically shake them, then it's a sleep terror. And so I think it's good. That's like step one in treatment is you got to figure out actually like what it is. But
Uh,
I'll let Allison discuss what else we do.
Yeah, but what's the difference between a sleep terror, aka night terror? That's the old school way we used to call them, but now they're called sleep terrors. Sleep terror
I'm so with
versus
the times.
a sleep terror versus a nightmare. What is the difference though?
So a sleep terror is a parasomnia. It's happening when we're, again, in that first third of the night when we're in that kind of deepest stage
Yeah.
of sleep. Whereas a nightmare is something that's happening. They both have kind of similar like reasons or antecedents of like not having enough sleep or being sleep
Yeah.
deprived. But a nightmare is something that we can treat. To me, the difference is really all about treatment and the
Yeah.
stage of sleep that we're
Yeah.
in, which is very boring.
Yeah. And a night sleep terror can also be like more like a blood curdling scream in a different
Oh, the
kind of,
presentation.
yeah.
Oh gosh, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Is that what you're getting at? Yes, it's terrifying. It's like screaming, sitting.
Yeah.
Maybe there might be getting up and walking. I mean, God, my kids have never had sleep terrors. Yeah, I know yours has, but like, the way that I hear them described sounds awful.
Yeah, they're not
Horrible.
Awful.
Yeah.
So Allison, what are the
Right.
treatment?
But Andrea, that's what I was just going to say. I feel like the biggest difference is what you do during the
Mhm.
waking hours about them, right? So for a sleep terror, we tell parents all the time, don't talk about it. Your kid, you don't need to ask them if they remember. And, can you believe you did that last night? You were screaming like crazy, right? Because we don't want to create worry or anxiety. That's a
Yeah.
scary thing. Imagine when you woke up in the morning, someone said to you, you were screaming like crazy for 20 minutes last night. Could make you a little nervous to go to bed,
Mhm.
right? Could create some anxiety for you. For both of them, though, we always talk about sleep hygiene because we know that if a kid isn't getting enough sleep, that can often be a reason why a nightmare or a sleep terror is going to appear. So we always are checking the routine and the amount of sleep they're getting to cross that off the list. And then with something like nightmares, we spend a lot of time during the day helping kids to rewrite the dream in some way, right? So some sort of rescripting or even redrawing where we'll have a kid draw a picture, tell a story, write a story of what that nightmare was, and then rewrite it in some way. I was just talking to someone yesterday where the nightmare was about having worms in the bed. And I said, well, what if it was gummy worms and it was candy and you were sleeping in a bed of candy, right? That's a lot less scary than worms. And you can draw candy worms. They're not as scary, right? Those, those sour, yummy, delicious things. So it's things like that, just getting kids to see that they can rewrite the ending. It can be different. It doesn't have to be scary. Can be a pretty easy way. And then we have them kind of practice it a little bit, kind of review their new ending, almost like I used to call it like dream planting, which I don't think is really like a scientific word for it, but to kind of like set the stage for, I'm going to dream about gummy worms in my bed, not those scary worms that woke me up.
Gives them more of a sense of control over something that they feel like they don't have control
Absolutely.
over. Yeah. And I think, and I talk about,
that's a nightmare scary.
And I talk about it on social media, like, and my daughter's fine with it. Like my kids, I was a sleepwalker and my kids had sleep terrors and sleepwalk too. But even we were just traveling to Europe. And when we got there, my daughter was so sleep deprived that she wasn't having sleep terrors anymore. She's outgrown that, but she was having a confusional arousal. So just woke up and she's like, oh, and she just started talking to us, but she's totally asleep. So even when things like that happen, because they can outgrow sleep terrors and then just have more of these confusional arousals, I just I don't engage with her. I just take her and I guide her by the shoulders back to bed. And we tend to outgrow that sort of stuff. So she doesn't seem to be bothered by it.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's another reminder about nightmares. A lot of times I feel like parents during the night, when a kid comes in with a nightmare, they're like, oh, what was the dream about, sweetie? Right? So like, again, we are in the middle of the night. Our focus is getting back to bed, right? So we are just reiterating, like, you are safe, you are good, we'll figure it out in the morning type of thing. Because a lot of parents, I think, really, they feel spooked. They try to over reassure. They get into every detail of the worms in the bed. And that really makes it worse. So, again, you're not going to get them to take a deep breath and do all that stuff in the middle of the night. So we got to just reassure and usher back to sleep.
Thanks for listening to Sleep Talkin' with Dr. Shelby, a Sleepopolis original podcast. Remember, if you're tired of hitting the snooze button, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now in YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And for even more sleep tips, visit sleepopolis.com and my Instagram page at SleepDocShelby. Today's episode was produced and edited by Freddie Beckley. Our Senior Director of Content is Alana Nunez. Our Head of Content is Molly Stout. And I'm Dr. Shelby Harris. Until next time, sleep well.